You're listening to Practice Growth HQ.
The podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies to help grow your healthcare practice faster.
PracticeGrowthHQ.com. Your thriving healthcare practice starts here.
Now here's your host, Angus Pryor.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ, where we talk all about what's required personally and professionally to get your practice growing faster. Now, today we're going to talk all about the ROI, the return on investment in terms of your marketing with my guest, Len Ward. Len's an accomplished entrepreneur and marketing expert. In 2004, he left a successful finance career with Credit Suisse to pursue his passion for marketing. He founded Comexis and later went on to found Ward Consulting. Len's expertise lies in solving digital marketing ROI problems and optimizing investments to improve ROI. He's worked with brands such as Johnson & Johnson, the University of Pennsylvania, and more, all the way from Philadelphia. Welcome, Len.
Thanks for having me.
Len, we like to start with the fast five, kind of quicker questions, quicker answers, so people can get to know you. Question one, where did you grow up?
I grew up just outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey in a town called Clementon, actually, whose claim to fame is the #1 golf course in the world, which is Pine Valley Golf Course.
Really? Okay. I must admit, I am a fairly keen golfer, so that's good to know. All right. Question number two, favorite book besides your own?
Favorite book besides my own? That's a good question. I would probably say Citizen Soldier by Stephen Ambrose, story about how soldiers were living in World War II.
It's funny you say that. I have been reading a lot more on World War II in recent times. I just, I suppose it's 80 odd years ago, and I think it's just so far removed from the time that we live in now that it makes for compelling reading. Citizen Soldier, I'll be having a look at that one. Question three, what is one of your superpowers?
One of my superpowers. I can always kind of forecast things pretty accurately. I don't know why I do it. It's scary, but I can always normally kind of have a bit of premonitions, and I hate it because I always try to deny it, but I can forecast things, and it's weird.
Rightio. Well, we should talk about the stock market together.
I wish I could do that.
All right. Question four, something you wish your 20-year-old self knew.
I think I wish my 20-year-old self knew. I think the best thing I could do is I really wish I could read a balance sheet the way I can read a balance sheet now. I think that would guide me in a lot of better paths on Wall Street and things like that.
Okay, very good. And then finally, Len, question five, something you're grateful for.
Grateful for my wife and kids. I'm very fortunate to have a great family. So I do every day. I appreciate having them.
Good one. Now, look, on Practice Growth HQ, Len, it's fair to say one of the things the listeners really like is people's entrepreneurial journey. And I alluded to that in the intro. Why don't you give us the kind of 1 to 2 minute version of how you ended up where you are now?
So I did get my start on Wall Street, which was great. I was a young guy on Wall Street, but I did learn quite a bit on Wall Street, I guess maybe almost through osmosis. But when Wall Street kind of came to an end for me, I actually was part of a .com startup, which was more of an e-commerce startup. So we had a couple of people get together. We created an e-com startup. And that's where the digital marketing really arrived, because it was, at some point you had to try to identify, this is all the way back in like 2004, 2005. You had to try to find a way to drive traffic to your website. That was a very new thing almost 20 years ago. So when you did SEO, you did pay-per-click, you were doing it for dozens of search engines. Google was kind of like a baby at that point. So after that was done, it was actually after the '08 housing bubble in America that kind of crashed and things went down. We were selling high-end luxury items, or actually high-end Broadway tickets is what we were selling. I took a step back and said, I want to really learn more about this digital marketing. So I actually went back to school, learned some coding, and I opened up a very small agency. That agency morphed into a full-size agency, which is Comexis, which ultimately landed over me to Ward Consulting. The main reason I got involved in Ward Consulting was the #1 question I was getting from clients that every agency always arrives at is, what is my return on investment? I need to know what my ROI is. I don't think I'm getting anything out of this. And after you beat yourself up as the marketing person for a long time, you take a step back and you say, it's not that they're wrong, and it's not that my agency is wrong. I just believe that there's a mathematical formula here that a lot of us are really not acknowledging. So I kind of basically, looked at it and I was like, all right, what did I learn on Wall Street? What did hedge fund managers, mutual fund managers, what were they constantly asking these companies to try to arrive at how are you going to hit your revenue, and how can I kind of fuse that into what I've learned in marketing. Ultimately, it got me to the point where I believe there is a formula, and I believe there is different types of conversations you should have with your agency or your CMO to arrive at a real ROI. So from Wall Street all the way over to here, that's kind of how I got here.
I love the fusion, and one of the things, I think we're up to about episode number 70 on this podcast, and I love the fact that people's journeys are all different, and that, I suppose a person happening upon your business for the first time would say, well, how on earth did you end up, kind of here? But once we understand your background, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So
it does.
So, well, let's get straight into ROI then, because I believe this is a question that every listener's thinking, which is kind of, look, marketing's good, but I never really know whether I'm getting a good return or not. Now, I know from our chat beforehand, you're saying there is really one key misconception about marketing ROI.
Well, I think the biggest misconception of marketing ROI is people are like, well, I don't know what my marketing ROI is, and I don't know what I got from this. Well, because you didn't ask yourself the number one question before you got involved in marketing, and that was, what is your goal? I don't mean goal where people come in and say, well, my brand, and I want to build a digital footprint. That's great. But what is your financial goal? Is it $1 million, $5 million, $20 million? What is it? Because then when you have that number, you now have something to weigh your investment against. And the biggest misconception people have is, I'm just going to look at the leads, look at what I closed, how many patients I got, how many clients I got, and I'm going to then arrive at an ROI. You have nothing to weigh it against. If you say I need, $1 million in revenue, this is how many leads, this is what I closed, then you can say, here's what my sales and marketing bought in, and then you could start establishing a return on investment. But that is the single biggest problem that business owners have when they are trying to judge whether their investment's worth it or not.
That is interesting. We had a previous guest on the show, Mornay. I've forgotten his surname, but we spoke about what it takes to scale a business to kind of $5 million to 10 million to 20. And one of the things that he spoke about was just sort of getting deliberate in your sales and marketing process, that you have it very heavily systemized, and which dovetails very nicely into your concept of kind of what's your goal, what does success look like, and then looking at those metrics on the way through. So, Len, it sounds like you've got some secret sauce here. Like, how do we find a marketing ROI?
It's not really a secret sauce. The marketing ROI arrives from understanding your customer acquisition costs. And I think that the biggest deficiency businesses have is they really don't establish what it costs to acquire their customer, and then what the components are within the customer acquisition cost. So your customer acquisition cost is anything sales, marketing. It could be your MarTech stack, your investment in Google, Facebook, Instagram. It also is your salespeople. It's your people that are interacting with your clients that may actually help them sign up to become a patient or some sort of client. And really kind of bowing that up and saying, okay, if I'm looking at that investment, for every dollar I'm putting into that, am I getting $3 back on the lifetime value of my client? And the lifetime value is, how many times will that patient visit you and pay? How many times will that client show up at your store and buy something? That's the actual lifetime value. When you've established your customer acquisition cost, weighed against the lifetime value of the client, the baseline is normally, for every dollar am I getting $3 back. Some people may need $5 back. They may need $7, they may need 10, whatever it may be. But that's how you truly begin to identify what my return on investment is. The wild card in what I'm saying in that, though, is that clients may come in and say, well, I want a 50 to 1, or I want a 25 to 1 for what I'm investing. And that can happen. However, if you're looking at your funnel, your pipeline, however you want to look at it, and if you want to identify the holes in your funnel or the holes in your pipeline, it's going to cost you money to fill those holes. Let's just say you're living in the lead stage. You really need a lot of leads, and you have to live on Google AdWords or some sort of paid platform that's prohibitive. It's expensive. You can no longer control and say, I want a 25 to return, 25-1 to return. If all the holes are covered, but you really need leads, you may have to live at a 3 to 1, a 2 to 1 to try to generate those leads and build that, do a little account-based marketing to eventually get to a profitable ROI. So telling somebody what you want before people understanding what the cost is to fill pipeline holes is normally the first mistake you're going to make in really trying to identify a real ROI.
Okay. Len, I have to say I've spent the last 10 years or so dealing with healthcare professionals, and that little thing, that little sort of paragraph or two that you've just covered, I would be surprised if one practice in 100 knows these numbers or is maybe even thought about it. And that's not to say that what you're describing is kind of way out there. This makes good business sense, and yet practices are not doing it. This is what I would see. I would think many of the listeners would go, Len, like, what sales team? And the truth is that for many healthcare professionals, certainly in Australia, and I know it's the case in the US as well, we are moving from, back in the 80s, it would be like graduate, get your certificate, get your registration, put them up on the wall, put your welcome mat out, and then you're going to be booked for like weeks in advance. This concept of having to engage in marketing and indeed sales was extremely foreign. Unfortunately, in most places in Australia and the US now, those days are long gone. Now, look, if you're super regional or something, well, maybe. But, the clients that I'm speaking to every day are people who go, hey, Angus, there's all these other, practices of my type there, whether it's, doctor, medical, physio, whatever. And so they're having to sort of slowly come to terms with this. So there's marketing and there's ROI and there's sales and so on. We've had many discussions, listeners, on this podcast about sales. Need to understand that's not about trying to get someone to do something they don't want to do. It's not that at all. It's helping people discover what they need. So I am Angus, the healthcare professional. Let's say I've got a business of, I don't know, maybe we're turning over $1 million a year just for round numbers. I've got, say, a team of 5. Let's call it in the dental field, let's call it 1.5. And let's say I've got a team of 6 or 7. How do I work out my ROI?
Well, I think so. How do you understand your ROI from the $1.5 million you generated?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty simple. You basically go in and you divide your sales and marketing, and you put that into the revenue that you got back, and you try to identify your customer acquisition cost, divide that into the number, and then you can basically come in and say, okay, this is the return on investment for what I have. I'm also basing that on the $1.5 million is all brand new patients. They're brand new, to the front door. So if you're 1.5 million, you come in and say, all right, that was profitable. I invested $150,000 and I got $1.5 million back. So I'm technically, and I like my mix. I feel good. I'm at a 10-to-1. I feel it's a 10-to-1, right now. It's a 10-to-1 investment. If those patients are going to be with me of the average of over 3 years or whatever it may be, then maybe it's even like a 15-to-1. So that would be one way in which you can establish what the return on investment is. But it really is, what did I put in sales? What did I put in marketing? And what exactly did I get back from that? That is kind of how you want to weigh and establish a return on investment.
I would say most practitioners listening to this podcast would not have a dedicated salesperson at all. In fact, we had someone recently say, can you optimize one of our services for leads, our marketing efforts? And we almost fell off our respective chairs because it's just not something we see in the medical field. Okay, so I'm gonna stop you on that, because that's where we get lawyers to say that all the time, and I'm like, you're wrong. You're the salesperson. So if you're spending time with a patient, or like an attorney has to spend time with a potential client, and let's just say they have an initial consultation. I don't know how the billing procedures work with you. Sometimes there might be a free initial consultation with a doctor. Maybe it's like, okay, we'll do a cleaning or whatever it may be. Yeah.
You have to factor that into your customer acquisition costs. And too many times they don't do that. So if it is a dentist and they're coming in and they're doing a cleaning and they're doing like a checkup, and maybe that's free. Or maybe it's like a lower number than normal because you're trying to get them in the front door. Your bedside manner, how you're talking to the individual to get them closed in, that has to be baked into your customer acquisition. Too many times businesses will say, it's just what I invested in Google. Maybe it's my CRM, and maybe I sponsored a couple local teams and a couple local pubs or something, and that's where my advertisement is. If you're spending any time with a brand new person, you're trying to convert that person over, you are now the salesperson. A portion of your salary, and you can prorate that any way you want, needs to go to that customer acquisition cost. And right there, it's that leakage in that customer acquisition cost that business owners don't know. And that's when they start making wholesale decisions. The marketing's not working. The sales team's not working, or my ad at Google's not working. no, it is working. You're actually, the problem is your salary or the time you're dedicating, you're not accounting for that. And maybe it's you or the problem. Maybe you do need a salesperson or a customer experience person to kind of help out, because maybe you're a great doctor, but your bedside manner really isn't good, but you can solve problems. Does that make sense? I get people to kind of start looking at that, saying you have to look at every single touch point for an individual that's not your patient or not your client yet. You have to factor that into your customer acquisition costs, and too many businesses don't. And right there, your ROI, it's never going to be a proper ROI.
Yeah, look, in some ways, Len, I was poking the bear there because I completely agree with you, but I just know how many of our listeners think, respectfully, that there is this sense of, oh, we're not salespeople. I would have to say to you, really, the difference in many cases between a practice that's, I don't know, you've got 10 associates there instead of one or two, whatever the field is. One of the main differences is that the practices have got serious about their sales and marketing. They figured out there is a process for this and that we need to get this right. Now, in your practice, listeners, it may be that your sales, quote unquote, would be your, the person who's answering the telephone at the practice, because that is clearly a sort of win or lose moment. We had 10 calls today from potential new patients and we booked in 7 of them and we missed 3. Well, that is pure sales. I mean, I know, there's can be this sort of discomfort in healthcare at talking about, oh no, we're not salesy. I'm not asking you to be salesy, but the fact is, if someone becomes a patient, that in a sense is a sale. Maybe you want to call it something else, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So we've got our customer acquisition cost, which is where I'm going to add up the cost of, Google and maybe some social media, and maybe it's getting the website right, and maybe I'm doing some consulting, the time, maybe Jenny on reception spending half a day a week on social media, and, maybe if you added everyone else up, they're doing half a day on, speaking to potential patients and booking them. So we've got a dollar cost for that. Let's say, for argument's sake, that's $30,000 a year. Then we work out what is the median spend for patients for each year, or do we go to the actual spend for the patients in that first year?
You want to try, you want to try to go the median spend. So if a patient's with you and the average lifespan is 3 years and they're spending $100 a month, whatever it may be, that's the number you want to derive from, because you may have to do a couple touch points. Maybe there's a postcard you have to mail out. Maybe there's an email. Maybe there's something on social media to try to keep them. So you can kind of bake in that account-based marketing to keep the client. But if you feel as if your product's good, you feel as if that your service you offer to patients is really good, and the patient averages maybe 3.5 to 4 years, whatever it may be, that all told number, you have to really try to say this is what it is. So if it's $1, an individual is going to come back and give you $10 over the course of 3 years, you have to put all of that in and say, this is my real return on investment. And so the problem is sometimes like, well, if I'm not seeing the right return on investment, or I don't really like the money I'm getting back, well, that's when you have to step back. And that's when you master the allocation of your customer acquisition cost, when you understand. So if you're going to go out and say, I really like my product's as good as anyone's out there, we really kind of like, what we do, then it's really trying to understand how to allocate that money within the customer acquisition cost. And if you're not getting your return on investment and you feel as if your product is as good as anybody's out there, hey, if you're innovative like a Uber or a Netflix, that's going to, that's a totally different game. That's a purple cow game changer. But all things being equal, if you're kind of similar, then if you are not succeeding, then there's a hole in your pipeline that you're not properly investing in. And 9 out of 10 times, that will come back to the digital marketing. Or 9 out of 10 times, I'll look at their customer acquisition costs and I'll realize they're spending a ridiculous amount of money on car wraps, maybe billboards. They don't really need an awareness campaign because a lot of people know who they are, but maybe they're having a really big problem. To go back to your point, they can't close patients. Like patients aren't coming back, or they're coming 1 or 2 times. So the investment has to move there. So once you learn how to really, really manipulate, like look at the holes in the funnel and fill the holes in the funnel, and understand that the costs are, you don't dictate the cost. The cost will be dictated to you. That's how you scale your business. That's how you get a profitable return on investment. And that's when you're kind of moving above the clouds per se, and really kind of separating yourself from your competition. But it's really rolling your sleeves up, getting your hands dirty, and saying, I really need to understand what these numbers are and how to manipulate them.
Okay. Can I ask, because I'm going to do the math for the listeners in a second, but I just want to check, Len, you touched on something. I think you're right. I would say for many healthcare professionals, the median length of time that a patient stays with them. I mean, of course, there are some people who come once and you never see them again, and there are people who've been seeing you for literally decades.
Yeah.
But if you average that all out, I think it probably is in that sort of 3 to 4 year mark. Maybe if you're in the country, it's a bit longer, and the city, maybe it's a bit shorter. As you're trying to work out that cost for your marketing return, am I right in saying that some of the costs that we would be investing in relation to retention, as you say, sending out a few postcards, or a team member that gets on the phone, weekly and says, hey, Len, we haven't seen you for a while. Do we include that in the cost as well?
You do. And I think the thing, especially in the medical field, is the retention cost, I think you and I can agree, are probably really, really low. Yeah. Once you feel really comfortable with a doctor, use your name, Jenny's your doctor, you feel really good about her. The chances of you leaving Jenny are going to be minimal. So that's where I would start baking those costs into your overall marketing cost on a yearly basis. It's almost like having a byline, in your marketing campaign and saying, okay, this is kind of account-based marketing. So, that would work into your operating expenses. But would I factor that into the customer acquisition cost, kind of sustained? No, I think that would have to be a bit of a separate cost running forward.
All right. Well, here I'm going to give you some back of the envelope maths here, listeners, because I'm in this space and I get a chance to do this pretty regularly. So we'll pick on dentistry for a moment, and we can talk about the other fields in a second. Dentistry in Australia, the median spend per patient per year for most practices is around the $500 mark. I've seen it as high as $1,000. I've seen it as low as about $400. But I find many practices, they're zeroing in on about that $500 mark. And let's say that it's a 4-year retention. So on average, for each new patient that comes into the practice, they're probably going to invest $2,000 with you over the next 4 years. There'll be some people who are outliers who, as I say, come once and you never see them again. And then there'll be people who'll be with you for decades. And certainly in dentistry, there's lots of high-end procedures they can do. But what would be typical for let's say we've got a practice that's doing 1.5 mil. And let's say the marketing's going quite well, and you can say, well, we're probably bringing in, say, 20 people a month, just try and keep the numbers pretty simple. So that's 240 people a year, multiplied by a lifetime value of about $2,000. I have to get out my calculator there, but I think that's those are the kind of numbers in terms of the return, and then what you're doing is dividing that by your marketing costs, which is, as I said, for a practice about that size, maybe the total marketing cost, I'll say somewhere between 20 and 50K. That's the kind of, and if my maths is correct, I think you're getting something like a 10x return.
Yeah, you're saying the return, you're getting $240,000 on a $10,000 to $50,000 marketing investment. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I think, we could get out our Excel spreadsheets and figure this out. But I would say 240 patients at $2,000 lifetime. So let's call that $500,000. And your investment to achieve that is going to be in the range of, let's say, 20 to 50K, which means you're getting a 10x return on that.
Yeah, even if you bake in a little bit of account-based marketing, which I said separate, but let's back it in there, you're still at 10x. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question is that's not sustainable. So as more people get into the digital marketing spaces, you're dealing more and more with the competition, because stateside, there's still 50% of our companies that really have not engaged in a full digital marketing campaign. So we haven't even seen the full growth yet. And the funny part is we may never not see it with ChatGPT growing and how the new search engines are going to be looking shortly. So if companies were to say, I want to invest $50,000 and I want $500,000 in return, my step back would be like, well, you're assuming that we're going to be able to generate enough leads at a $50,000 number and your pipeline's solid. So there's minimal cost there. So you're telling me 50. What I tell people is if you want to get to $500,000, I look at your pipeline and then I come back and say, this is what it's going to cost on your pipeline. These are your haves, these are your needs, and this is the current auction environment. A lot of times companies will come in and say, yeah, but I can't do that. I have to be a 10-to-1 because I have XYZ I have to operate in my business, or I have this kind of operating expenses, or I have a really, really big office and it's really highly technologically advanced. And I come in and say, the days of you making marketing just kind of like, this is the last thing we're going to do. We have a big practice. We have great dentistry. Oh, and by the way, this is what I have left over for marketing. I actually have a video of this on my site. It doesn't work that way anymore. Those days are gone. I have a great dentistry. Here's how much it's going to cost me to acquire my customers, and then I got to build backwards. You don't open up a massive office or have car wraps or hire a bunch of staff if you don't understand your investment in sales and marketing to build your revenue. And let's call it the way it is. The economy has been really good over the last 10 years for everybody globally, and it's been pretty easy. If you did digital marketing decent, and I'm not knocking it, because digital marketing is not an easy thing, and it causes a lot of stress for people like us in marketing. But the game has changed. And now that it's getting a little tighter, a little tougher, if you don't kind of go about it the right way, what's my product, what's my customer acquisition cost going backwards, it's funny because I can't tell you how many times I've walked in offices, and what's forced me in the word consulting, you walk into legal offices, and I mean, these legal offices are beautiful. They're works of art. And they'll sit down and say, I have $10,000, generate me $30 million in cases. Is this a joke? Why don't you fire half the attorneys out there and we can get started on a real marketing? So I'm kind of rambling and it's long-winded, but that is kind of when you are looking for an ROI, a huge misconception or a huge problem is companies are letting their operating expenses dictate what their investment in sales and marketing should be. And it actually needs to be the other way around. That's the only way in which you're ever going to truly scale in a modern digital world.
Yeah. Look, Len, listeners, I wish you could see through my eyes at the moment or listen through my ears, I suppose, because what Len has basically given you there is a look over the horizon. He's allowed you, you might have recall in his intro, he mentioned one of his superpowers was sort of, in a sense, predicting the future, recognizing trends, whatever the case may be. And I'd have to say that macro, this trend is dead obvious. Again, I'll stick with something I know. In Australia, a couple of decades ago, marketing was like, really? Do I have to spend even a cent on it? Because, my marketing is to set up shop, put out my welcome mat, maybe put an ad in the yellow pages, and I'm done, and the ROI in those days was massive. But with increasing competition, I mean, every single healthcare profession in Australia, the number of practitioners, and this is true in the US as well, the number of practitioners practicing is growing at a rate far faster than the population's growing. For example, the number of practicing dentists in Australia is about growing 3 times faster than what the population's growing. The number of doctors in Australia, I think, is about 4 times faster than what the population's growing. The number of physiotherapists, physical therapists, as they call them in the US, is growing at about 6 times faster than what the population's growing. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just you've got to adapt. Apparently, one of the things that sets the human species aside from all animals is our ability to adapt. And so, we've moved from zero marketing required or negligible marketing required, let's say historically, to now where most healthcare professionals in Australia and the US are going, yep, I realize I need to do this. And I think the next wave that's coming is we just got to get better. And for many of you, as unpalatable as that may be, I think that's getting more serious about actually examining your ROI. I think it's getting more serious about really dialing in the marketing and the sales process at your practice. You may not want to call it sales, listeners, but that's what it is. Because if you stop selling any services, you're out of business. So those are some brilliant insights. Look, Len, you opened a little can of worms there that I feel I've got to go back to, which is you spoke about ChatGPT and indeed the sort of new search engines. Now, you and I could speculate a bit about this, but just give us your thoughts as we start to wrap up.
So it's funny. I just had a conversation today with a partner agency, and I was just talking to them. They wanted to bring me in just to kind of have a conversation about, where the state of digital marketing is. I say this, and I don't mean to say this in a really, really light fashion or come across as like a crazy person. ChatGPT is going to completely revolutionize anything and everything we've ever done from a marketing and business searching standpoint. So as dramatic as it was the first time you turned on the internet back in the mid 90s and were like, wow, this is like mind blowing. And all that was doing is just kind of, you were typing in an address and, just content arose. It was basically a virtual book is all it was. This is going to make that look like child's play. Somebody equated this to electricity. I thought that was extreme, but the more I hear about what this is going to do, they're right. So that we're on a precipice of business and how you market, how you communicate, how you scale, how you do everything. ChatGPT, AI, whatever term you want to use for it, we're there. And it's happening so fast. I feel like the world we're going to be in 8 to 12 months is going to be so dramatically different because of this, that it's alarming. And I think from a marketing perspective, because I kind of consult with clients on this, pay attention to what's going on. You have an investment in AdWords, or you have an investment in paid platforms, and maybe you have a lot of money on social media, as a lot of people probably you're working with do, and because that's kind of where you're going to harvest the patients. This is going to upend everything. So really, my recommendation to even if you work at the company, or you own the company, or you own the firm, your practice, and even if you're cutting the checks and somebody else is handling your marketing, if something comes across the news and it's talking about this, take 5 minutes and listen. Because you're going to be presented with decisions on sales and marketing. And so we won't say sales, but marketing. You really need to understand exactly the underpinnings of this for you to make intelligent decisions on your marketing investment. It's that important. And I do think it's going to upend everything we're doing. We're already beginning to see it, as you're probably seeing it. We're already using it for a couple things here and there. I've never seen anything like this in my life. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is mind-blowing. What is ChatGPT? I'm trying to give you the simplest version I can. It's essentially a website that you go to, and where you can ask it, it becomes much more conversational. Hey, give us the answer to this. And then when the answer comes back, you go, yeah, well, that was okay, but could you make it a little bit more like this? And it's much more of a conversation. Google, you can't do that. You can say, find me a doctor near me. It can do that. But then if you go back and say, oh, well, from that list, can you tell me which ones are open on a Saturday or whatever? Like, Google doesn't have the capacity to do that, whereas this thing does. Len, I feel like we could spend an entire episode talking about that one, but alas, our time has come to an end. Look, I really appreciate the value you provided today. Listeners, I just have to say, I wish you could hear this through my ears, because this is literally a look over the curve. This is a look around the corner at what's coming. And I think don't use this as an opportunity to just be alarmed and kind of think, oh, the world's coming to an end. We will adapt. That's what humans do. The question for you is just to recognize that I would say macro, we've moved from in healthcare not having really to worry much about marketing at all to now where most healthcare professionals in Australia and the US are thinking about marketing somewhat, even though sometimes begrudgingly. And then I think the next step for us is to get more serious about the kind of marketing and sales integration and how we bring patients into our practice to get that return. Len, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to connect, what should they do?
Just visit me at ward.consulting. You can sign up for my newsletter. I actually have weekly thoughts, which I'm actually kind of starting this week, where I just look at everything marketing investments. I just jot down some notes. I throw it out on an email blast. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to fill out a contact form, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you.
All right, len.consulting. So this is len.consulting. You're waiting going, where's the .com? Where's the .net? There isn't one. Sometimes you can now have these different ones. So it is literally, do we need the www before?
No, it's just domain. And I might have told you the wrong. It's actually Ward, WARD.consulting. So instead of .com, .net, .org, it's .consulting. So if you own a business out there, .dentistry, .restaurant, you can get that now. Buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good one. Again, Len, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. So we've covered a lot there, haven't we? And while knowledge is great, it's really applied knowledge that makes all the difference, doesn't it? So what is one initial step you can take as a result of what you heard today? Make sure you go and do that before you go on to the next thing. Finally, if you got some value from today, I'd really appreciate it if you'd head to where you heard this interview and leave us a lovely 5-star rating to give us the encouragement to bring you more great content every week on Practice Growth HQ.
Thanks for listening to another info-packed episode of Practice Growth HQ with Angus Pryor.
Any links mentioned, along with an entire transcript of the show, can be found at practicegrowthhq.com.
And to make sure you never miss another episode, go now to Apple Podcasts or wherever you heard this show and hit subscribe.